You tick me off, oozer of evil. Goofy.
Samurai Shodown is a game that Kane and I thoroughly enjoyed playing against each other, but at the time that we were playing it, I didn't know any lore in regards to the series, so I want to fix that today. Now, as per usual, I was given multiple different recommendations when it comes to, once I get to the Samurai Shodown lore, which video I should check out. I selected this one because I've seen Matt recommend it to me in other videos and other series as well, and quite frankly, I've never seen a video from him before, so I'm just kind of curious what his style is going to be. Considering the length of this retrospective, we'll see how much yapping goes into it, but potentially it's going to be spread out into 2 or 3 parts, so look out for those parts in the future once we get to them. And as with all of our reactions, before watching, please make sure to go support the original creator. A link to do so will be at the very top of the description. Like always, my dudes.
武士道とは死ぬことと見つけたり、修羅道と
Hell yeah,
は
dude.
倒す
So
ことと
awesome.
見つけたり、我、悪鬼羅刹となり、目の前の敵すべてを切る。
Interesting. Was that like one of the original openings for the older games, and then they recreated it in the 2019 version, I think it was? But considering the game's name, Samurai Shodown, it evokes this sort of image that you probably have due to like popular media out there depicting samurais and whatnot. But I do feel like this game really gives you that feeling, not just through visuals, but also through gameplay as well, where each moment is just so incredibly tense because the damage is just so high that any singular mistake could be your end. And that's something that I absolutely love about this game. And it's why I really enjoy watching the Evo matches for Sam Show, because it's just so tense all the time.
SNK's Samurai Shodown started as something quite different from what was eventually unleashed on unsuspecting arcade goers back in 1993. According to series creator Yasushi Adachi, it actually started as a side-scrolling beat-em-up, with the twist being that the player would have been able to control monster-like hero characters. Now, while that was the initial plan back in those days, video game development had much less corporate oversight, meaning Adachi felt that the monster brawler concept wouldn't connect with many players, so
We're also talking about SNK here. Now, if you're new here to the channel, you haven't followed the fighting game journey, we've covered a ton of stuff in regards to that, and we mostly learned about SNK through the King of Fighters retrospectives, as well as the Fatal Fury retrospectives. But honestly, SNK's history has been some of the most interesting, gaming company histories that I've seen so far. And I'm just not surprised that there was so much flexibility and so many just weird concepts that were in development at the studio that ended up becoming something completely different.
he just decided to axe the entire thing and start fresh. Instead, he decided to make a one-on-one fighting game with strong connections to Japanese history, as it could feature various characters based on real-life historical figures, completely fictional ones, and, to appeal to a global audience, some plucked from around the world. The main gameplay concept that Adachi and his team developed was centering things around the thrill of armed combat, something very few fighting games were attempting at the time. Because of this,
Yeah, like what other 2D fighters are armed combat games, like weapon-based fighting games? Because you know of Soul Calibur, and then there's Samurai Shodown, but I mean Soul Calibur is 3D. I'm sure that there are a lot of titles out there. I just don't know about them, or I guess my mainstream perspective on a lot of fighting games just doesn't allow me to see all of these cool weapon-based fighting games, which there hopefully are, and that exist.
the staff dubbed themselves Team Samurai and felt focusing their efforts on emphasizing high damage via deadly weapons would set their game apart from its contemporaries. There was concern that this approach was not the correct one though, as SNK higher-ups felt that the weapons dishing out such high damage values would be frustrating for first-time players to have to contend with. So they then urged Adachi to make appropriate changes to bring things more in line with other titles, a mandate he promptly ignored. Both he and his team strongly believe that a single powerful strike having the potential to end a match injected a sense of drama and tension into the gameplay that would have been lost if it had been toned down.
I do very much agree with that. If we had toned it down to match basically every other fighting game ever, then I feel like Samurai Shodown would lose one of its core identities that sets it apart from the rest of the crowd. And of course, I do understand the concern of high damage like that, because the amount of interactions that would happen between two players would be much, much less than any other fighting game out there, basically. But regardless of whatever method that you choose, there's always going to be pros and cons to it. And I definitely think the pros for that high damage kind of work for Samurai Shodown and the style that they were going for, the setting that they were going for.
And thus Team Samurai stuck to their guns, or swords. They named the final game Samurai Spirits, or Samurai Shodown, as per the suggestion of SNK's American marketing team, as it semi-incorporated the word shogun into it, which was more descriptive of there being a particular clash or conflict. It was a massive hit when it slashed into arcades worldwide in 1993, and positioned itself as one of SNK's hottest new franchises, proving that Adachi's initial design instincts were correct. Fans were immediately drawn to the weapon-on-weapon fighting concept, along with all the colorful and very distinct characters. So it's here where I would like to introduce the main cast, because many of them, barring one or two exceptions, would stick around for the entire series. First off, we have Haomaru, the wandering Ronin, who was, for a time at least, the central character, as he was.
I'm very interested to see that throughout the history of Samurai Shodown, how many actual samurais are within the roster. Because I believe that was like a fun fact that people in chat had shared while we were streaming the game, that apparently there's, technically speaking, like only 2 or 3 people who are actual samurai within the game called Sam Show. So, although even here on this first game, I don't know the dude with like the Wolverine claw thing. I don't think he's in the 2019 version of the game, like the latest one. So I guess he may have gotten dropped somewhere along the way, or maybe it's specifically the latest one that doesn't have him.
It's loosely based on the legendary Miyamoto Musashi. Then we have Nakoruru, one of Shodown's more popular characters thanks to her personality and avian familiar, which tied into her origins of being an Ainu, the indigenous people of the Japanese islands who are usually depicted as being in tune with nature. Hanzo Hattori, who is based loosely on the real-life historical figure who lived during the Tokugawa period, was the series' resident ninja, although not the only one. That would be shared with Galford, an American based out of San Francisco, who's never too far from his equally ninjutsu-skilled dog, Poppy.
Yeah.
Earthquake was the only other American and one of the most impressive sprites you'll ever see, though that did make him a very big target for any sword or spear. Charlotte hailed from France and of course exudes class and elegance through her fencing-like fighting style.
Charlotte looks pretty friggin' different here in her original design. Do really enjoy playing her though, because she has a much more neutral focused game plan, which is something that I do want to improve on. And honestly, playing Samurai Shodown helped me figure out that sort of step in fighting games a lot more. Like genuinely, Samurai Shodown felt like putting on training weights. If you don't know how to play neutral well, then you're just not going to play Samurai Shodown.
And of course, her irritating laugh. Yagyu, again loosely based on the historical figure, fights with double katanas, but I guess that was offset by his lack of depth perception.
I guess you didn't see that, did you?
Guanfu represented China, and specifically the Qing dynasty, and whose weapon drastically changed depending on what game he was in.
Yeah.
Ukyo
I know from
Tachibana,
with
the
pillar
other
one.
classic depiction of a samurai inspired by Sasaki Kojiro, fought with blinding speed and was originally set to be the rival to Haomaru, although that idea got dropped by the second game. Kiyoshiro.
Yeah, it seems like throughout the different games, there's technically like a new protagonist or main character that they focus on. It's not always Haomaru. So I'm interested to see why that happens or for what reasons. Maybe it's a JoJo's Bizarre Adventure situation, although it doesn't seem like a generational thing. Maybe it's just a passing on of the torch.
Senryo, a flamboyant kabuki actor who wielded a spear, while maybe not having been the most popular fighter of the bunch, was nonetheless a memorable addition. Equally as memorable, though, was Tam Tam, a wild warrior that hailed from Brazil and was shredded as all hell. Like, dude, please, just cut out the dehydration stuff, yeah? Finally, rounding out the cast, we had Mr. Scissorhands himself, Gen-an Shiranui. This goblin-ass looking oddball was originally planned to be one of the playable heroes from when Samsho was a beat-em-up, yet somehow managed to survive during the transition to a one-on-one fighting game.
I see. So that's why his design is like this, because it was supposed to be like a monster beat 'em up, right? Yeah, this was a guy who I don't recognize, so unfortunately, he doesn't survive the ages, it seems.
And before you ask, no, he is not related to that other famous Shiranui.
Yeah.
Shiro Tokusada Amakusa was the big bad you squared off against at the end of the game, and say it with me, was loosely based on the historical figure, and specifically his depiction in the 1981 film Makai Tensho. While certainly having a mean streak all his own, he's actually a puppet of Ambrosia, the underlying demonic force that plagued much of the series.
No one can resist the power of Ankoshin, not even a holy warrior such as I.
Endings were a very elaborate affair in the original Samurai Shodown, featuring a death scene for Amakusa and a satisfying conclusion for your chosen fighter that didn't rely on just text crawls or panels. These were full-on cutscenes with additional NPCs, scene changes, dialogue, the whole 9 yards. Hell, Team Samurai even snuck in a few cheeky cameos to boot. I think it would also be important to do a basic overview on how the general gameplay worked in Samsho 1.
Actually, wait a minute. I believe when we were going through like the interviews for the fighters in King of Fighters 15, that there was some sort of reference to that cameo when it came to Haomaru's interview dialogue or something along those lines about, talking about how he recognizes Mai Shiranui. And, technically speaking, that should not be possible because the timelines really don't match. But because of that cameo, it was just a neat little Easter egg reference.
As there will be plenty of carryover into future sequels. Like almost all Neo Geo fighters, you had the 4 face buttons, and in Shodown, they were separated between attacking with 2 strengths for both weapon strikes and kicking. All characters had both forward and backward dashes, which was useful to get out of harm's way of incoming attacks. Clashing with your opponent's weapon resulted in a power struggle where you had to pound the buttons to overwhelm the opposition, and doing so knocked their weapon out of their hand, at which point they needed to retrieve it if they wanted any chance to make a comeback. This meter here built up if you took any hits, and once full, increased the damage you dished out, but only for a short period of time. Adachi had explained in a 2017 interview that the team had decided to add this feature after a particularly heated session of playing Street Fighter II, for research purposes of course, where Adachi had gotten so angry after a loss that he just shouted out in a bout of frustration, which was why the gauge was eventually dubbed the Rage Meter.
I feel that sometimes. I get it. Sometimes you just need to let out a good shout in order to increase your power levels.
The last thing I wanted to touch on was Samsho's level of violence, which saw many interesting changes and evolutions throughout its history. During gameplay, you'd see clear instances of blood the moment steel would meet flesh, but whenever you'd finish off your foe with a hard slash or a specific special move, it would produce 2 distinct effects: a Kurosawa-esque arterial blood spray, and your opponent getting completely bisected. These wouldn't happen every match due to their nature, so so they felt like somewhat of a taboo when they did occur. But of course, that meant they would prove controversial when it came to the home ports, of which Samurai Shodown had plenty of.
I mean, I think Mortal Kombat also faced a lot of the same issues back then. But while I did have to turn it off for the sake of stream, I do appreciate that it's still a part of the game. Because obviously, it's one of those unique factors that does set it apart from other fighting games. And, well, quite frankly, it just makes logical sense. We're fighting with weapons that are very, very sharp. Shit happens.
Obviously, there's not much to say about the Neo Geo home conversions in terms of technical stuff, as they were essentially just the raw arcade game with a few options thrown in. So for each entry in the series, I'm going to be looking at the more notable versions, as some of them had some, let's just say, quirks. Starting off with the Sega Genesis. Well, it's a weird one, I can tell you that for free. While it certainly looked the part when it came to the in-game visuals, it had the least content and some truly baffling omissions. Haomaru was missing from the intro, there was no longer a zoom effect during the gameplay, the post-match taunt profiles were gone, a bunch of announcer voice samples were also missing, and biggest, literally of all, was the removal of Earthquake and his stage. No doubt this was due to technical reasons, but he was also MIA in the Sega CD version, which was handled by Funcom of all people, but it at least contained the full intro, the post-match visuals, and the high-quality soundtrack you'd expect. The blood and fatality effects were also 100% accurate to the arcade, but I will say that in terms of graphics, the Sega CD version is less colorful than what was on the Genesis, which was typical for the Sega CD. The Super Nintendo port, meanwhile, was a totally different beast, where it did have a lot of that missing content, but took some concessions to achieve it. It has the full intro, the post-match visuals, all the announcer voice samples, and even Earthquake. This was done via specific choice made by Takara, where they used the zoomed-out perspective from the arcade original as the default view, shrinking the sprites down so they would take up less memory on the cart. This meant that the sprites were less detailed and smaller, but the trade-off was that the game would run consistently, and allow them to keep the sprite of the big ol' Texan.
Interesting. I didn't realize that. Okay. So the reason why he wasn't there was because he was just so big. He was too big for the game files to even store anymore. The system couldn't handle him. Due to like what a lot of modern games do nowadays, I completely forgot about the fact that we were also running into hardware limitations that we had to get around. And it's like SNK was kind of known for pushing hardware to its utmost limit and going pretty overboard whenever it came to a lot of their sprite animations. I'm actually quite fine, though, with this adaptation of the game in order to make this port work. Because, well, it doesn't remove any content, but this is what we have to do. Because this is all that we have right now. Much, much prefer that over removal of content.
Takara even saw fit to add in an extra mode called Countdown, which was essentially a time attack that challenged the player to slash through the entire cast as fast as they could. The soundtrack and effects were also very rich and bassy, and even had Dolby surround sound support, as was the case for a lot of versions worked on by Takara. This port wasn't without its faults, though. The blood and fatality effects were completely removed in the versions sold outside Japan, along with some hilarious edits to the win quotes.
For whims like you, using my full power is a no-no. Got him. I wonder if this was the same situation as the whole Fatal Fury thing, where Terry goes, I'm in the pink today, boy, wubba wubba, or something like that. I have no idea what bro was going on about.
These included such classics as Kiyoshiro's, "Now, in this scene, I rip open your belly," being changed to, "You cry like a baby," and Tam-Tam's "My blood boils for battle," becoming, "My sweat bubbles for battle."
What the? Bro went from being a pillar man to being I don't know. Who sweats bubbles? I don't even know.
These changes were minor, however, when compared to the reduced sprite size, which sometimes did make getting a read on your opponent a little bit harder than it would have been otherwise. Now, there's not much to say about the handheld ports of Sam Show other than what they were missing, so let's start there. The Game Gear held up fairly well in terms of graphics, if not a bit choppy, but it also saw even more cuts, namely Earthquake and Tam Tam, which resulted in a very svelte roster.
I guess Tam Tam is also pretty big. Not as big as Earthquake, but comparatively to the rest of the cast, probably the second biggest one.
Still though, it's a surprisingly decent effort for the Game Gear, which historically didn't have a great track record when it came to fighting games in the first place. The Game Boy obviously didn't have a great reputation here either, but thankfully there's a bit more to say about its version of Sam Show 1, even if not all of it was great. The intro was recreated, the full 12-character roster was available, and starting up an arcade run rewarded you with a cute little intro screen that set up your fighter's backstory, as seen here. After that though, you started a match and... Okay, yeah, so not every sprite was accurate. I mean, it was the Game Boy after all, but okay, anyway, what was more annoying was the fact that whenever you won a single round, you'd get the victory notification, then a full win quote for some reason, then the results screen, then the second round would finally start. This happened every single time, so it took forever to get through a match, and unfortunately, the gameplay wasn't engaging enough to make up for this tedium. For further whatever reason though, Takara also decided to go the extra mile once again and managed to cram even more characters onto this tiny Game Boy cart, such as Hikyaku, the item-giving guy, Kuroko, the referee, and even Amakusa. They were all—
Oh shit. So are these added to this one? Roko, the referee? We see him in the background of the stage in the 2019 version.
Unlockable. Thanks, I think. Out of all the ports though, the most impressive just so happened to be developed by Crystal Dynamics.
Actually, no, never mind. I don't think it was added in that version specifically, but more so just they went the extra mile to add them into the game despite them being background characters.
Yes, you heard that right. The 3DO version was marketed as the definitive one, and that wasn't hyperbole, outside of the Neo Geo, of course. It contained every character, every drop of blood, the full intro, the camera zoom effect, and even the little animation of your foe being stretchered out of the screen, all straight from the arcade. It played great too, although there were some control concessions due to the 3DO's kinda crappy default controller. The only real knock you can levy against this port though was the fact that the sound effects had a scratchier, lower quality aspect to them that the arcade and even the SNES version didn't have, but that's a real nitpick from an otherwise amazing port. With Samurai Shodown having become such a success in arcades across the globe and at home, coupled with SNK's penchant for capitalizing on hot franchises, it was inevitable that Haomaru and friends would clash once again in an even more incredible sequel. Hitting arcades just a year after the first, Samurai Shodown 2 was, and still is, considered a series high point. So much so that it's still played competitively even to this day.
Really?
It took place roughly a year after the events of the first Shodown, with Amakusa apparently dead, and the series' first female boss, Mizuki, taking his place, although she just happened to be another agent working at the behest of Ambrosia. None of this was really explained in the game's infamous intro, however, as it was more concerned with letting you know that someone somewhere got involved with the Troubles. There were a few new additions and a subtraction to the roster, totaling out to a much beefier 16 characters over the original's 12, with Tam Tam unfortunately being the only one not invited back.
No.
New to the series was Haomaru's eternal rival, the moody and bloodthirsty Genjuro Kibagami, who just so happens to be one of my personal favorites. Next up was Seeger from Prussia, who hit like an absolute tank via his historically accurate gauntlet arm. Then we had Cham Cham, who hailed from the same tribe as Tam Tam and who injected a sense of fun into the proceedings. And finally, there was Nicotine, an elderly monk who bore more than a passing resemblance to Dakwon from Ninja Scroll, a film which Adachi did confirm was a source of inspiration to the
Interesting.
team.
Never seen this one.
Mizuki, the aforementioned final boss, didn't make many other appearances after this, but she at least made an impression with her canine companion, who also tended to get quite demonic in the heat of battle. The entire returning cast were also completely redrawn, although they were still pretty similar in both form and function, they just looked a little better doing it. The same went for stages, which were even more gorgeous than those seen from the first game, as they were bursting with additional animation, color, and detail. Gameplay-wise, there were also a few smart refinements. You can now roll backward or forward, which let you clear mid-range attacks, and also go into a prone state if you really wanted to get tricky. Whenever the rage meter had reached its maximum level, the game then helpfully showed you the command motion for your super attack, which was another new option for players to utilize. That, in addition to doing great damage, also broke your opponent's weapon if it hit.
Yeah, I remember doing that super. I guess we pretty much just recreated it in a modern engine. But man, it's just so neat to like play something and then go back and look at the history of where these things came from, what they were inspired by. I don't know, seeing the history of it all just feels so satisfying somehow.
Oddly, the pickings were rather slim when it came to the ports of Samsho 2, despite its sterling reputation.
Weird.
It didn't see release on any 16-bit consoles or handhelds, and aside from a rare Windows 95 version, there's not much else to point out, except for one. Samurai Spirit's Kenkaku Shinan Pack was a PlayStation 1 release that bundled together ports of both Samsho 1 and 2, and were really solid versions for the most part. I say most part because unlike the ports from 93 and 94, these were plagued by a ton of loading screens in both games, which obviously put a hamper on the action. While interesting, this Japan-only bundle was only released in 1998, and by that time, the franchise had long since moved on. So while it was not a massive step forward for the series, Samurai Shodown 2 didn't really need to be. It looked better, sounded better, played better, and diversified the cast even further, adding fighters, from that point on, who would become series mainstays. So, despite what Kuroko might say, Samsho 2 was anything but a horrible atmosphere.
What the hell? What was that line actually supposed to be? Right. Looks like we're not exactly going to be going into any sort of lore behind the characters. If you guys are interested in seeing that, do let me know, and any videos that maybe cover that specifically. I did see something from Shoryu Game, I think was the YouTube channel, that maybe only covers the lore. But yeah, just let me know. Regardless though, I am interested in the history of the development and whatnot, so I find this quite fascinating in and of itself.
Samurai Shodown 3, also known as Samurai Shodown 3 Blades of Blood, but only according to the Western PlayStation front cover, was released in 1995 and was the first time SNK attempted to shake up the formula.
It's the kid.
One of the ways they attempted this was with a pretty drastic overhaul to the art style, which leaned into something darker yet more detailed, which extended over to the character designs as well. Because of this, it meant that the number of playable samurai shrunk back down to 12, and SNK certainly had made some bold, and some would say controversial choices about who didn't make it in. Charlotte, Jubei, Cham Cham, Earthquake, Genan, Seeger, Wanfu, and Nicotine were all MIA, while the newbies, Basara, Rimuru, Gaira, and Shizumaru, the new main protagonist, were added to the lineup in their place. Amakusa makes somewhat of a confusing return too, because he was added to the default roster, was no longer an unplayable boss, a distinction that would go instead to Zankuro Minazuki. This beast of a man had been running roughshod across Japan just long enough that the 12 playable samurai finally decided it was time to put an end to his bloody ways. Taking him down played out much like it did in the previous games, them having a second more powerful form, but unfortunately the reward for doing so was a little less spectacular this time around.
I wonder if these bosses do still suffer from SNK boss syndrome, and they are just nigh impossible to defeat normally. Because you know that is most definitely a thing with King of Fighters. But what about Sam Show? Made by the same company, so I'd assume so.
Endings were significantly scaled back in Sam Show 3, as they had been reduced to a single screen of text rather than the cutscenes of the earlier games, which was a bit disappointing. If you carefully scanned the roster, you would have noticed that most of the wackier characters from the first two games were the ones left out.
Yeah.
And that was intentional on Team Samurai's part, as they'd wanted to play with the concepts of good and evil. Literally. After selecting your chosen warrior, you were given the choice of a slash or bust style, which would change their default moves rather significantly. These two sides were meant to represent both good and evil, with slash being the more chivalrous of the two, while bust was intended to be just the opposite, and was reflected even further with a darker color palette upon selection.
I see. I mean, that's pretty cool, but also why did we call it bust? If busting is going to make me evil, then I don't want to be good.
SNK also saw fit to add another customizable feature on top of that, which was the blocking style, where beginner class initiated auto block, normal grade maintained the status quo, while upper grade did not allow for blocking at all, making it a very risky option, but you at least got unlimited rage meter to compensate. The intricacies of the fighting system saw some major changes too. Air blocking, a controversial one, was added in. A, B, and C were relegated exclusively to...
Trying to think when we were playing the latest one, I don't think there was air blocking. I think blocking was made to be intentionally very risky. No, not, jumping was made to be very risky in that game. Obviously very rewarding considering the amount of damage you could do, but if your opponent expected it, then yeah, you were done for. I don't really think that air blocking is a Samurai Shodown thing or should be a Samurai Shodown thing. I feel like it's much more appropriate for the air dashing anime fighters with like mega combos and a bunch of cross-ups and whatnot that happen. Sam Show feels much more a ground-based fighting game. But hey, it's SNK, they're here to experiment, that's what they do.
Slash strength, D was just for kicking, B and C triggered a universal overhead, and A and B let players dodge into the background when at a distance, or quickly circle behind their opponent when they were at close range.
We got some Fatal Fury action going on.
Personal, kid.
Finally, you could manually charge your rage meter much like you could in the King of Fighters, instead of having it only build up through taking damage.
Okay.
Speaking of damage, that was something that increased quite a bit in Blades of Blood, and was a change that some found was a bit too harsh. Hard slashes now hit harder than ever, and was altered most likely due to the increased defensive options that Team Samurai had included. Kiroko and Hikyaku no longer appeared during the action either. Another change meant to hammer home the new style and atmosphere, which meant if you were hankering for some sushi or a slab of meat during a match, well, you were shit out of luck.
Damn.
Sam Show 3 was certainly a game of extremes, and it should be noted, much like Fatal Fury 3, that its development was negatively affected by the Great Henshin earthquake that disrupted many industries in the country when it hit in early 1995. Regardless, it still looked absolutely gorgeous, and the slash bust system would go on to become a fan favorite feature.
It really is a shame when these outside factors come into play and change a lot of things about developments.
But the huge cuts to the roster and the unhinged damage levels meant it also alienated a portion of that same fan base. It also didn't help that the port situation was pretty dire when it came to the West, as outside of the Neo Geo, there was only one version made available in North America and Europe, and that was for the PlayStation. Unfortunately, this saw a huge number of animation frames cut from across the board, as well as numerous and long loading screens which made for an irritating play experience. If you were into the Saturn import scene though, you would have been able to enjoy far quicker load times and much more fluid animation, as was the usual case when it came to 2D fighters for the system. And while it wasn't released outside of Japan, there was also a pretty nifty Game Boy port that added Jubei back in as an additional hidden character, and went harder on the chibi art style that would later typify the Neo Geo Pocket. Fortunately, Team Samurai weren't ignorant of these issues, and thus they decided to focus on reiterating and improving what they had so they'd be able to blow fans away with their next effort. And that's exactly what happened with the fourth entry in this franchise that was already becoming legendary.
Amakusa's Revenge. This is where the fire dude and water dude get introduced.
Samurai Shodown 4, Amakusa's Revenge, cut its way into arcades in 1996, and much like 2, is considered one of the best entries in the series, and also happens to be the last 2D installment developed by the original Team Samurai. There was, however, a slight changing of the guard, in that this was the first game that wasn't produced by Yasushi Adachi, as he was busy with another project we'll get to later on. Team Samurai looked at what worked in 3 and what didn't. Thus, the detailed character sprites from Blades of Blood were retained, but the general color palette was brightened up. The roster also saw a big increase as per the comments of fans who had played 3, which totaled to a mighty 17 characters, although some animation frames and special moves were sacrificed to squeeze them all in. The returning classics included Tam Tam, Charlotte, and Jubei, with all 3 looking quite sharp in the new art style. In terms of new blood, 4 also introduced Kazuki and Sogetsu Kazama, a brother duo that specialized in the elements of fire and water respectively. Amakusa was once again kept in the default roster, which was a bit weird as it made the new boss situation even more awkward given this game's subtitle. Right, so you're calling this Amakusa's Revenge, you say? But he's just the sub-boss here because Zankuro has returned.
What?
And this big bastard was even harder to beat, and even if you managed to best him, you still had the final boss to contend with if you managed to get to Amakusa fast enough. Who was this final boss? Well, it depended on who you actually selected, as this final boss was always another character that had personal entanglements with your chosen samurai, much like in Street Fighter Alpha. Fortunately, this meant that the longer, more detailed endings from 1 and 2 also made a return, which was something that I was personally thankful for.
That's pretty neat. Still very confused why we're calling it Amakusa's Revenge though, but maybe there's some sort of plot thing that happens. Lore-wise, that makes sense.
But again, you could only achieve this special extended ending if you beat Amakusa in time.
This person in the background.
If you didn't, well, then you'd get something far less rewarding. As for gameplay innovations, 4's new contributions definitely made an impact. First of all, Slash Bust returned, and health was increased with double life bars to compensate for the traditional high damage. Air blocking was removed, as well as manually charging your rage, but pressing C and D together now gave you a multi-hitting combo slash, which was more of a band-aid style solution for those characters who already had low combo potential. Holding down on the joystick and attacking above a fallen.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Samcho was never that high combo game ever, considering how high the damage is. But maybe just the way certain characters work made it pretty difficult to get multiple hits off, so people would just gravitate towards characters that made it easier to do so. I mean, that does seem like a band-aid solution, though.
An enemy OTG'd for additional damage, while unique throw animations were replaced with defense breaks, which were simple grabs that pushed your opponent back, allowing you to press the advantage. A new type of super move was also added to spice things up, and that was the Lightning Blade attack, or as it's sometimes known, the Isen.
Yes, the Isen. The Isen makes all these matches so much more just tense, and that's what I was talking about earlier, is if you make one wrong move, the moment your opponent notices that you're not holding down back, ooh boy, you're done for.
Were incredibly powerful single strikes that could quickly end the round once you popped your rage meter, sacrificing it in the process.
Could only do it once,
were also fairly telegraphed, so they could be blocked and punished accordingly. Sam Show 4 also had the distinction of being the first game in the series that featured unique post-match fatalities, or overkills, which are an even more decisive way to style on your opponent. These were obviously a response to Mortal Kombat, complete with a screen darkening effect, but they were still pretty in line with the level of violence that Sam Show had traditionally exhibited up to that point. A lot of multi-hitting combo flurries or powered-up specials that ended with the same finishing effects players had seen before. SNK didn't stop there though, as they added one more match-ending maneuver which allowed players to end things on their own terms, if the fight didn't go their way. Honorable deaths, or forfeits, were a special command you could input at any time as long as you were armed that would cause your character to off themselves in a sometimes comedic and sometimes violent fashion. The only reason you would do this is if you were clearly going to lose the first round, because when you started the second, your rage meter would have been fully maxed out. Oddly, SNK made it so that these could be triggered during any—
Wait a minute. That animation, that's an animation that's used in one of the Fire Dude's moves, right? But he doesn't actually die, or I don't think he loses HP, but they did incorporate that animation. Oh, that's fun. It's so funny, though, that they incorporated a Persona 3 yourself mechanic, and you get benefits in the next round? It's like the honorable samurai way, or whatever.
Round, even the very last one, but far be it from me to understand exactly why you'd do so. Unlike Sam Show 3, when it came to ports, Amakusa's Revenge was a bit more interesting, but it's also a slightly more depressing situation in that, outside of the Neo Geo, it did not receive a single Western version at the time of its initial release. As you'd expect, the Japan-only Saturn port was extremely competent. Fast loading, good audio, fluid animation, and all the characters were there. The PlayStation version, once again, was technically inferior in a lot of ways, but it's still worth discussing for a few reasons. First of all, it was specifically dubbed Samurai Spirit's Amakusa's Descent Special, and had all the hallmarks of a late 90s PlayStation port of a 2D fighter. Muffled sound quality, lower res pixel effects for fire and blood, missing animation frames, and more annoying loading screens, which included a nasty 5-second delay before the start of every match. What made it special then? Well, for whatever reason, SNK included 2 extra characters, but if you started up either the arcade mode or training, you never would have guessed. Tucked away exclusively in the Versus mode was a playable Zankuro and Cham Cham, straight from Sam Show 2. Literally. SNK just reused her old sprite, but at least gave her new portrait art as well as a bust variation that took away her monkey but added a variety of new special moves. This was the only version of 4 that had these 2 characters selectable, which made it one of the more unique but flawed curios in the franchise's history. Speaking of curios, there was also Samurai Shodown Pocket Fighting Series, for what else but the Neo Geo Pocket. This was a handheld monochrome conversion of 4 that did its best to emulate the arcade original, but unfortunately the jump to the NGP meant several characters had to be cut, including Tamtam, Gaira, Charlotte, Kiyoshiro, and Basara. To perhaps make up for that, Zankuro was made accessible via code, along with a brand new challenger, Shiki. Yes, Shiki was retroactively added into Sam Show 4 in a roundabout way, but we're not ready to discuss Shiki quite yet.
Okay, is this her first appearance in the Samurai Shodown series in the Neo Geo Pocket version? I think Shiki's really cool though. I'd figured as much that she wasn't going to be like an OG character. It took until 4 here, technically speaking, for her to show up.
This was definitely a lighter take on the source material, evidenced by Haomaru shouting, "You tick me off, oozer of evil!" Goofiness aside, pocket fighting was
Yo, bars though. You gotta respect it.
Solid stuff, but you could definitely feel there's a little bit of room for improvement, which SNK would eventually achieve on the Neo Geo Pocket Color later on. For a good percentage of fans, Samurai Shodown 4 is still considered the best of the classic 90s series, because after that point, the franchise started to take some very drastic turns, some for the better, and some for the not so better.
Oh boy. Alright, let's see it. What happened? Oh! A drastic turn, a drastic change? Yeah, you could say that. What's this? Is this actually like a full-on 3D fighter for Samsho? Oh boy. Considering that Samsho is still a 2D fighter even nowadays, I don't think this one worked out, did it? For the Nintendo 64, I have to assume.
Released in 1997 for SNK's ill-fated and expensive Hyper Neo Geo 64 arcade board, Samurai Shodown 64 was promoted as the company's premier 3D title. But sadly, despite some very cool and forward-thinking features, it didn't quite make the splash they had wanted, especially when compared to the newest arcade boards which were hitting the market.
When this released, I wonder like what the timeline was and what other 3D fighters were out there on the market. One has to assume that this was SNK seeing the 3D fighters out there and people really wanting to play them. And obviously it was a lot cheaper, probably, in order to make the 3D models than it was to make the sprites, I have to assume. So yeah, we'll experiment. We'll try it out. It'll probably fail like most of the projects that we did, but hey, at least we give it a shot.
This established a new separate series of games that happened outside the main chronology, but they're not considered non-canon either, they're just different. 64 tells the tale of Yuga the Destroyer, another new villain who had cursed dozens of babies while they were in utero, and who, 20 years later, all fall under a sinister spell, which Yuga hoped would accomplish something. This new saga saw 9 classic warriors returning: Haomaru, Genjuro, Nakaruru, Rimururu, Ukyo, Hanzo, Galford, and fresh from Samsho 4, Sugetsu and Kazuki. Oh, and there was also Kuroko, who made a rare playable appearance.
Yo, my god! He's not the ref anymore. When you see the ref enter the ring and start to throw hands, you'd best be sweating, bro. Like, you know that shit's about to go down.
But only through the use of a code on the select screen. There were only 2 new playable warriors introduced: a metallic-armed strong-style fighter named Hanma, and finally the aforementioned Shiki, who is more or less the new main character. As you'd imagine, Yuga did the honors of being the final boss, but there were quite a few sub-bosses as well, as during the arcade ladder, you'd suddenly encounter a monstrous pile of stitched-together corpses known as Gandara. After that, you'd then face either Deku or Dekuina, 2 of Yuga's doll-like goons, but the ending you'd eventually get was a basic text crawl, which was a bummer because I had assumed that with the new 3D models, I was gonna get like Mortal Kombat 4 style hilarity. I can't lie to you though.
Dude, I'm kind of excited to learn more about Mortal Kombat someday. We're not exactly delving into the bigger series because those are going to take a very, very long time. But when we do get around to them, I think it'll be a lot of fun.
The Hyper Neo Geo 64 wasn't exactly cutting edge, as it looked a generation behind both the latest Tekken and Virtua Fighter, although...
Oh shit, yeah, We're competing against those titles? It's not gonna work.
To be fair, it wasn't bad looking either. In terms of positives, the pulled back camera and full 3D movement did a lot to make this entry feel distinct and fresh, coupled with the fact that players could be ringed out or sent crashing through walls and floors and into different stages, beating Dead or Alive to the punch by several years.
Wait, really? We beat Dead or Alive? I thought that was a Dead or Alive thing that they had made. Never mind. Well, there you go. That's cool. Was Dead or Alive inspired by us?
The slash bus system returned for the 3rd time, making it one of the series' most long-lasting gameplay elements. But that didn't mean a few new wrinkles weren't added as well. A and B were changed to be the only attack buttons, with C being used exclusively for throws, while D controlled all your 3D movement. There was also a stamina bar that drained whenever the player would run around the arena or get too offensive, but the rage meter could be used to make that bar unlimited whenever it was completely full. The lightning blade attacks, or Isens, also made a return, but were now simpler to perform and even more powerful, along with your standard set of multiple super attacks for every character. Sam Show 64 did not, however, contain any overkills, and the general level of violence had also been toned down a bit from what was seen in Amakusa's Revenge.
To be more
there were
family
sadly
friendly?
no ports of this one, as SNK's initial plans to release a new CD-based console based on the technology were cancelled after the arcade version failed to do the business they were hoping for. And while the fan response to 64 hadn't been super positive to begin with many disliking the greater emphasis placed on combos, juggles, and movement, SNK wasn't ready to give up on the idea of 3D Sam Show either. So they...
Oh boy, there are more in this entry? Ooh, baby. But yeah, I can kind of understand that the original appeal of the games was not the juggling combos. It wasn't any of that. It was the footsie-based gameplay that people had come to enjoy that was unique to this series. If they wanted the fantastical stuff, there were plenty of other 3D fighters at the time that probably did it a bit better than Sam Show tried to do here.
Push forward with a sequel with the goal of trying to incorporate as much feedback as they could, and while certainly a noble goal, and unfortunately didn't help move the needle all that much.
I mean, I can respect SNK for the attempt.
A follow-up to the first 3D Samurai Shodown arrived just 1 year later, and while SNK certainly made an attempt to address the complaints of fans, this meant they lost some of that early uniqueness they had started off with. First of all, Yuga the Destroyer was brought back, which meant the plot was largely the same as last time. Recruit more puppets to Yuga's cause to meld the underworld and Earth together to a giant demonic buffet table. Fortunately, Asura, a dark warrior who originally hailed from, down below, stepped up as the new central character to hopefully put an end to all these satanic shenanigans. Fortunately, that didn't mean that the cast was gutted to make way for fresh faces, as SNK retained the 9 original samurai from the last game, Shiki and Henma included, and brought in 2 new slabs of meat as well. There's Asura, as previously discussed, but there was also Taizan Morozumi, a bit of an odd duck who battled with an oversized spear/calligraphy brush.
That's fun.
Okay. In addition to all that, Warrior's Rage went a bit harder on the evil bust versions of specific characters, giving them not just new colors, but completely new costumes and monikers altogether. During an arcade run, you'd encounter these evil variants leading up to the final showdown, most notably Shadow Asura and half-shaded Shiki, who were specific versions who happened to be under Yuga's direct influence. While those
that should have been me! I guess Shiki's supers have always been like that. Because I think even in the latest one, when she supers you, she gets real close, real intimate. And then you're dead. That's just her style.
For the plot-related sub-bosses, there were also a few others outside of that, such as the robotic version of Hanma, a sinister and wild Haomaru, and more primal elemental versions of Sogetsu and Kazuki. Wondering where these evil variants originated from? Well, that would have been right here.
Gotcha.
Gandara also reappeared as a mid-boss, but the conditions to fight him were far more specific, and Yuga once again awaited players at the very end, but now shifted between a male and female form in between rounds. Endings were a bit nicer in this one too. I mean, they were still a wall of text, but you at least got a nice illustration of your character to go along with it. The switch over to new hardware also allowed for expanded audio capabilities, which meant that both games in the 64 lineup had absolutely stellar soundtracks. Naturally, some big changes were made to the gameplay as well. There are now 3 attack buttons, with D being used to do a quick dodge into the background/foreground, along with the stamina meter being eliminated, which, good riddance. To maybe counteract that though, a nerf was introduced for those that played a little too defensively, and that if you backdash too many times, your character would bumble over themselves and fall over, so tripping before tripping. A full rage meter.
I don't know about mechanics like that where you can just randomly trip over. I get that you want the matches to be fun, high octane, and playing lazy to not be rewarded like that. I don't know if the randomly tripping over is the way though. It's just like taking control away from the player. But then again, I'm not a game designer. Maybe it works within this context, maybe not so much in other contexts. Who knows? Considering the success of the 3D games and how there isn't a 3D Sam show right now, or at least like a modern release of it, probably did not go over very well.
Now allowed you to power up certain special moves, kind of like EXs, and the violence was increased significantly with more realistic blood spray, amputated arms, as well as a cinematic ending to any match that concluded with a decisive slash. But the main thing SNK did with this sequel was try and get it closer to the feel of the older titles, which they did by removing almost all of the major 3D elements. So no more free running, the fully modeled arenas, and the ring outs / stage transitions. Warriors Rage instead adopted a more standard 2.5D style of fighting, only retaining that aforementioned quick dodge. The game was still very combo / juggle heavy, and while the changes SNK made were not necessarily bad ones, it didn't result in a vastly better playing fighter in the end. Personally, I really wish they had added some of the older fan favorite characters that had been MIA for a long time. Again, as a brand new game, only featuring 2 new characters over the last one seemed like quite the pittance. Thankfully, SNK did try to rectify this somewhat with Samurai Shodown 2 for the always charming Neo Geo Pocket Color. This was based on Warriors Rage and contained the entire playable cast from the arcade except for one casualty, Hanma, which was most likely due to his sprite taking up too much memory thanks to the bus / system. SNK made up for this, however, by adding Charlotte and Jubei back into the main lineup, which I admit was a pretty fair trade. Yuga, of course, appeared as the final boss in this version, and they were even able to squeeze Gandera in there via a neat little gimmick fight. And while he wasn't nearly as big as he was in the arcade, his sprite was still impressive nonetheless. In terms of gameplay, this pocket-sized port retained the /bus system, supers, the lightning blade attacks, and was obviously in color. So out of all of the Sam Show handheld titles, this was absolutely the best one and totally worth owning today. The fact remained, though, that these 2 early
The great thing about SNK is that even all these like older titles, you can probably find somewhere to play and buy them. Probably on Steam too. Even on your modern consoles or hardware. But considering, well, I guess I can't really say recent anymore, but they did add some DLC characters into Art of Fighting. So I'm wondering, do we have anything at all planned for more Samurai Shodown in the future? I hope so, because I really love the series, but if somebody was going to do it for an older series like that, it would probably be SNK. So my hopes are pretty high.
3D attempts were released in the wrong place and at the wrong time, as they didn't receive any mainstream ports whatsoever. This was a massive shame because neither of them were bad. In fact, they were bursting with potential and introduced some cool new characters and interesting mechanics. But man, you're wrong, you say as you brandish your katana in a threatening manner. You forgot the PlayStation port of Warriors Rage. What about that one? Oh, I am so disappointed you asked.
Oh boy. What happened here?
For reasons I cannot fathom, SNK's American arm, or whomever, decided to add the subtitle Warriors Rage to this 1999/2000 PlayStation exclusive, even though it had very little to do with Warriors Rage. Until the widespread adoption of the internet, this situation most likely confused many a fan, as the only difference in the name was the lack of a 64, but that made all the difference, because this PlayStation exclusive took place 20 years after the events of the 64 duology.
Wait, why are we trying to confuse our consumers with weird naming senses or things that are just similar to each other? That would just work against any sort of marketing tactic. But this isn't even the first instance of something like this happening with SNK either. I think just maybe at the time the marketing team that we had for the international side of things was just not very good.
Because of that time jump, Haomaru was the sole returning fighter. Oh wait, Hanzo was there too. Never mind. Oh, but wait again! That was actually his son, who was just carrying on his father's legacy, so sorry, but that doesn't count. The rest of the cast was entirely new, as the plot revolved around this crime island that was run by 4 big bad bosses, which of course invited the need for a showdown. I would be remiss if I failed to mention, though, for all you rabid Nakaruru fans out there, that she and her sister did appear in some cutscenes, but I think they're dead or like spirits, perhaps due to the endings of Sam Show 2, but I'm still not 100% sure. The new cast included Saishiro Kuki, Jin Amon Hanafusa, Jushiro Sakaki, Rinka Yoshino, Saya, Haito Kanakura, Yasi Izanagi, Gario the Whirlwind, and Ran Po, a literal unwashed child.
I don't recognize any of these people. I don't think they stay in the cast for too long after this game. I could be wrong, but, I feel like this maybe did not go over so well. Once again, we're just introducing a new cast of characters, and we also had confusing naming sense, and people who were fans of Samurai Shodown bought this maybe were surprised, unpleasantly surprised by this cast.
And if you managed to beat the game with each and every single character, you unlocked a new one. But I'm not going to bother listing them here, as they're all clones of the default cast, just with different costumes and other minute changes. So think Battle Arena Toshinden 3. There were also the 4 bosses, Oboro, Tomakuki, Mikoto, and the only interesting and playable one of the bunch, Yuda, who was the fusion of the evil and non-evil versions of Asura from the original Warrior's Rage. Now look, I'd hate to continue being negative here, but it's really hard not to be when it comes to this one, as it was simply worse than both 64 games in pretty much every way. The cast was quite dull in my opinion, as they lacked any real flair or aura, and compared really unfavorably with all the demons and other eccentric characters from the series' history. Graphically, it looked significantly worse too.
I mean, they also just lacked the history and that appeal towards older fans of the series who wanted a new game, and then you bring out this. Where are my fan favorites? Where's my favorite character? Where's Charlotte?
The detail of the previous stages was gone. The UI and presentation were really boring, and it was overstuffed with ugly and super long, drawn-out CGI cutscenes. Gameplay-wise, well, it was pretty standard for the most part, but matches were super awkwardly broken up by this weird health/round setup. Each character's health bar was segmented into 3 sections, but invisibly, like these ridges here, they meant nothing. Once you depleted one, though, your foes slowly got back up, but their health bar was then a bit smaller. If you did it again, your fighter would then do a brief victory pose, but the match still went on, with your opponent now having a single chunk left. Once that was depleted, you finally, mercifully won the match. There was no traditional best 2 out of 3 round option at all, so...
Well, what were we doing with this one? We really were experimenting with very unique things that I've never seen before in any other fighting game. I feel like all these mid-round pauses are just not going to be good at all in any sense, like even outside of a fighting game. All those little loading screens between menus and shit like that, it just adds up over time. I think this may have been one of those things where they had a cool idea that in theory was neat, but in practicality was just tedious.
I think they were trying to emulate how Killer Instinct handled it, but they screwed it up somewhere along the way. Beyond that, the mechanics didn't do anything drastically different either. E-Sens were still there, as were Rage Explosions, Supers, etc. So honestly, the only really distinct feature was the awful segmented life bars. On top of that, the violence was toned down once again for the West. because while the Japanese version had very visible red splashes of blood, the localized version colored them white with no option or cheat to change it back. Not sure why this was done, considering it was released for the PlayStation and in 2000, but chalk it up to SNK's wonky decision making around that time.
Westerners cannot handle the blood. It would terrify them. Could also be just like all those regulation things or one of those horrible marketing decisions from the team that named it this way.
Speaking of the Japanese version, it was titled something very, very different, as I guess the original development team didn't feel like needlessly confusing their audience. Its full title was Tale of Swordsman, Revival of the Azure and Crimson Blades, New Chapter of Samurai Spirit.
What in the light novel, Dave? I mean, this is a translated name, I would assume. Maybe not a localized one, but holy. At least you know it's a new game.
Now, as to why SNK North America didn't just call it Samurai Shodown, Crimson Blades, or like
why not?
Samurai Shodown, we gotta stop Crime Island, I don't know, you'd have to ask them. So, Warriors Rage PS1 or Warriors Rage 2, to help avoid confusion, to some is considered a low point of the series, and while far from like a dreadful unplayable disaster, it did pale in comparison to pretty much everything that came before it.
But yeah, like, why wouldn't you just play Sam Show 2 or 4? I guess maybe these ones may have been easier to access because this one was on PlayStation, right? Maybe, but still, I don't know. I'd much rather play the beautiful sprite-based games than, quite frankly, this.
If this had been a more generic fighter that stripped out the very few references to Sam Show's history and had just been called Crimson Blades, let's say, it probably wouldn't have gotten the backlash it had received. But its reception, coupled with SNK's major financial woes at the turn of the century, meant that it would be quite...
Actually, what is SNK not in financial woes? I feel like it's a roller coaster all the time. And I mean, now we've certainly got money, but at what cost? At least City of the Wolves, it's looking pretty good, and we've got a new character basically every month, which is pretty insane for a fighting game, so I'm hoping that they keep up the quality. Regardless, though, I do agree that if this was like a new idea, like a spin-off thing in and of itself, it may have gone over much better, but when you say Samurai Showdown, people have an expectation, and this one certainly did not meet that expectation.
A while before we saw another Showdown, and when we finally did, it would no longer be developed by SNK.
Wait, what? SNK just lost the rights to it outright? Or did they sell it off? Maybe when the company collapsed at the time and they got bought out. Yeah, oh boy, I am not excited to see that. But regardless, my dudes, I should probably call things here for now. I have unfortunately run out of time to record. But looks like we're about halfway through. Yeah, just a little over halfway through the video. So next time that we come back, we'll likely be able to finish it. But yes, thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed your time here and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you guys in the next part. Later, dudes.